The gaming world is all about hype. It is. If you can't get millions of people to put their eyeballs on your game, then you're going to fail, at least according to all the marketing experts working for all these gaming publishers. So they'll put millions and millions of dollars into spamming ads at your face leading up to the launch, and then they'll cross their fingers and hope that you all went out and bought their game. But did you buy it? Well, in today's video, we're going to be looking at 20 games that were overhyped like crazy, but they still died almost immediately upon release. So you let me know which of these games you actually remember coming out and then dying. Were you hyped? Did they trick you into thinking this was going to be the next big video game? Drop a like, and let's start off at number 20. Who remembers Evolve? This game is weird because it was one of the first major examples of an asymmetrical multiplayer game. That's a genre that has absolutely exploded over the last 5 years or so, thanks to games like Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, but Evolve, it was early. It was released way back in 2015 before anybody really knew what to make of that gameplay format, and it also didn't help that there was a bunch of issues with the way it was distributed. Despite being a multiplayer-only game, Evolve was released at full price. Had a ton of server issues on day one as well. There was also hardly anything to do. And back on launch day, well, there were only a couple gameplay roles that were actually fun to play. So about 60% of the time you were going to be bored. Now, it got insane marketing. Lots of advertisements, but the servers, they dried up in record time to the point that it had to quickly be transitioned to a free-to-play model. But that wasn't even enough. The dedicated servers were shut down in 2018. It was about 3.5 years after launch. It's actually interesting because if this game came out today, I think it would have fared way better since there's a bigger market for asymmetrical games like this. But then again, maybe it would have failed even quicker since it would have had to compete with Dead by Daylight. At number 19, Anthem. I have a little pain in my heart every time I mention this video or this video game on any video. When BioWare announced they were doing something totally new for their next game, I was intrigued. You were intrigued. We were all intrigued. At that time that Anthem was announced, BioWare's reputation was really positive, despite the missteps of games like Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect Andromeda. They were still riding pretty high off the success of the Mass Effect trilogy and other Dragon Age games, so we were open-minded to what their A team would be working on, right? But then we saw the reveal trailer for Anthem. Was anybody else confused? Anthem had to have one of the worst reveals in gaming history because it was awkward. The people acting like gamers were really unnatural and the gameplay looked really repetitive and boring. And then when the game came out, we saw that not only was the trailer unfortunately a great representation of the experience, but there was also basically nothing that BioWare was known for in the final product. It was boring, it was bland, it was repetitive. A predictable looter shooter that apparently wasn't even interested in being a fun looter shooter because BioWare kept patching out all the fun exploits that people were discovering. Why? That's how you know you're tone deaf to your community. Anthem drastically underperformed and support ended just 2 years after launch. That was with a full server shutdown that was already planned. Actually, I think the full server shutdown's planned for 2026. Whatever. At number 18, Marvel's Avengers. An ongoing Avengers game with a lot of content, combat scenarios. Sounds great. But the odds ended up being stacked against the game almost immediately after the first trailer came up, and it died up. I mean, it did. It lost Square Enix millions of dollars after the servers dried up in record time. It released in 2020. Marvel's Avengers was supposed to be a third-person action game live service experience where you get to play as various members of the team and complete objectives while grinding up gear and leveling your abilities. And eventually, more heroes and locations would be added as DLC. Again, not a terrible idea, but several things contributed to Avengers' downfall. First of all, Square Enix decided to not put up the money for the Avengers MCU likenesses, which that honestly made it feel really cheap. I mean, you have a Temu Captain America, Temu Iron Man, you guys get it. Felt like a quick cash grab, which it was. It also didn't help that the gameplay was very basic. It was very repetitive, and it didn't really do very much with all the unique abilities of the characters. You didn't feel like you were playing as the Avengers, which was the whole point of playing it in the first place. And on top of all that, the game was riddled with technical issues right out of the gate. So if you decided to give it a try, like I did, you weren't going to have a very good time with it no matter how big of an Avengers fan you were. Marvel's Avengers was an extremely expensive game to make, and tons of marketing juice poured into it, but by the time it was all said and done, it was a massive financial disappointment. It was pulled from digital storefronts just 3 years after release, and I mean, if you're pulled from digital storefronts, that's the nail in the coffin. At number 17, Battlefield 2042. Now, Battlefield has had a fantastic run during the 2000s and the first half of the 2010s as well, but then things started going off the rail with BF5. The game started out with some major bugs, questionable design choices, although it eventually got itself back on track with updates. Fans were excited for Battlefield 2042 because the trailers made it seem like we were going back to be a true successor to Battlefield 4 and 3, which is where many people, myself included, see the peak of the franchise. So the trailers, they look great. The early gameplay looked interesting, give or take some weird design choices. And then the marketing train was going hard. But when the beta went live and people were immediately hit with reality right in the face, it was a mess. There was a lot of design choices that made zero sense. The maps were average at best, and the gunplay felt kind of weird and floaty, if that makes any sense. The movement, it was odd. Most importantly, there were too many bugs to list. DICE and EA were apparently confident that people would give them the benefit of the doubt because a few weeks later, the full game was released. Nothing was fixed. BF 2042 was a hot mess on launch day, featured all the bad design decisions from the beta and almost all of the bugs, as well as new ones that made the game borderline unplayable for a lot of the community. Also didn't help that in response to negative reviews from players, DICE, they decided it would be appropriate to be condescending to the community updates instead of just owning up to their mistakes and fixing them, which meant that the few players that were left on the servers had zero motivation to stay. I'll never understand why developers decide to be condescending to feedback. Good quality feedback, right? There was a mass exodus of the game to the point that games like BF4 and BF5 had higher player counts than the latest game that was released less than a year after release. Thankfully, Battlefield 6 seems to have gotten things back on track. But if it weren't for Battlefield 2042 completely crapping the bed, this franchise never would have probably gotten back on track. At number 16, talk about crapping the bed. These are going to get worse as we go on, okay? Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I was so excited for this. I was so excited for Rocksteady's comeback. I mean, making something new in the Arkham universe. How can you screw this up? But unfortunately, what we ended up with was not a single-player epic like the other games in the series. What we got was a weird looter shooter with some horrible writing, ugly character designs, I'll just call it an atrocious user interface, and a story that actively crapped all over the universe that Rocksteady had worked so hard to create and craft over the last decade. Oh, this was one of the last times we ever got to hear Kevin Conroy voice Batman. And yeah, if you've played, you already know. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was so heavily marketed off the legacy of Rocksteady and Batman, and I guess Warner Brothers really thought they were going to be able to sell the game off the name recognition alone. It didn't work. It didn't work out for them because they were entirely bought out by Netflix less than 2 years later after the game's release. At number 15 is Warzone 2.0. Call of Duty Warzone was a runaway success when it launched in 2020. It came at the exact right time. COVID was out. It just blew up. And it seemed like every time a major update came out, Activision lost some sight of more and more what people wanted. Activision, they've never been great at giving the COD community what they wanted, but that hit critical mass with the release of Warzone 2.0 in November of 2022, right alongside Modern Warfare 2. Activision said they were totally rebooting the game in an attempt to overhaul the stability and make the experience better, but it ended up pissing off everybody. There was lots of design changes that weren't asked for, completely destroyed the appeal of the game. There was a ton of new bugs introduced, and there was a ton of content completely erased from the experience, including a lot of stuff that people had paid real money for. And if you weren't happy with this new experience, well, get over it. Activision was basically just giving you the middle finger because they literally deleted the original Warzone from existence less than a year later. Warzone 2.0 has been bleeding players for years, currently at an all-time low. In fact, recent leaks have suggested that Activision is about to reboot the game again into Warzone 3.0, meaning Warzone 2 was such a failure that they need another do-over to get things back on track. At this point, they should just bring back Blackout. They really, really should. And what is the definition of insanity if you keep banging your head against a wall hoping for a different outcome? Isn't that what it is? Something like that. At number 14, Dragon Age the Veilguard. BioWare and EA. Man, what a combination. They were hoping that this game would get their iconic fantasy franchise back on the tracks. And I'm really not sure what they thought was going to happen after they changed the formula so drastically. Dragon Age the Veilguard changed drastic direction several times during development. For longtime fans of the series, it was the exact opposite of what they were looking for. And for newcomers that were just kind of opening the door to see what's up, all that they were hearing was how the Veilguard was a terrible departure from the first 3 games. So obviously they weren't going to jump in. This game was in development for close to a decade, and EA really tried to hype people up for the return of Dragon Age, likely in an attempt to make back their investments. But when the Veilguard released to lukewarm reviews and pissed off fans, the poor sales, they were written on the wall. According to EA's internal projections, Dragon Age: The Veilguard only hit about half of their expectations, and it contributed to a whopping 18% loss in share value. Yeah, I don't think we're probably getting Dragon Age 5. Heck, I would be shocked if we ever get another single-player game from BioWare ever again, to be honest with you. At number 13, Fallout 76. Now, right now, this game has turned itself completely around. I mean, somehow. But upon release, this was one of the most high-profile flops in gaming history. Let me take you back. 2018, Fallout 76 was supposed to be an online spin-off to Bethesda's iconic RPG franchise. Featured very limited RPG elements and an emphasis on interaction with other players who were wandering around the map. But during the release window, it ended up being one of the most controversial games in history because of the simple fact that it didn't work. At all. It didn't work. It ran like garbage. It crashed frequently. The servers were in horrible shape, and the list goes on. And even when the game was working as intended, which was rare, the game itself, let's just be real, it straight up sucked. There was nothing to do. There was absolutely nothing about the core Fallout experience that was properly translated into an online environment. According to insider reports, sales for Fallout 76 were less than 1/5 of what Fallout 4 sales were just a few years prior, which led to an insane loss of money for Bethesda following all the money they'd poured into marketing. And as you know by now, Fallout 76 turned itself around. Bethesda didn't give up on their project, and they eventually got it to be the game that they promised, which is what we see all the time. I guess it's nice, sure, whatever. I mean, I don't understand why it couldn't have been that game from day one, but hey, we got there eventually. At number 12, who remembers Haze? The picture with the Halo-looking guy with the cracked visor on his yellow helmet. This was one of the most highly marketed Halo killers ever. This was back in an era where it seemed like there was a new Halo killer getting announced every single month. It was a PS3 exclusive first-person shooter, big explosions, high jumps, futuristic weapons. And it was released in 2008, just a few months after Halo 3. Sony was hoping this would be their answer to Microsoft and Bungie. They put a lot of money into pushing Haze as their own exclusive FPS title with a great story and an exciting multiplayer. And that's what they said it would have. The campaign sucked, multiplayer was mid at best, and the whole thing was buggy and unpolished, almost as if it had been rushed out the door to try to compete with Halo 3. And every once in a while, somebody will show up in the comment sections of one of my videos and say this game was underrated, but it wasn't. You know it wasn't. Haze sucked. You're not going to convince me otherwise. At number 11, now the tragic downfalls start to really ramp up here on the video. Skull and Bones. You may say to yourself, Jimmy, this was never a hyped game. Everybody knew it was a flop right out of the gate. And on one hand, you're not wrong. Basically, everybody knew that Skull and Bones was going to be one of the biggest flops in gaming history. That didn't stop Ubisoft from hyping it up like crazy. Skull and Bones had one of the biggest marketing pushes I've ever seen for a game like this, and Ubisoft was really hoping they could summon success for it after sinking a decade of development and hundreds of millions of dollars into its creation. This is a game that started out as an expansion for Assassin's Creed 4, changed direction about a dozen times before it launched as some weird competitor to Sea of Thieves, but didn't have any of the charm of Sea of Thieves and about a quarter of the content available at launch. But then again, Sea of Thieves didn't have any content at launch either. According to insider reports, Skull and Bones only managed to draw in about 850,000 total players in its first month. That was including the free trial. That is one of the biggest financial failures of the 2020s altogether, and Ubisoft put so much money into making sure we knew about it. Maybe they should have just canceled it 10 years ago when it was clear nobody had a solid vision for it. And how do you mess up a cool pirate simulator? At number 10, this one hits personal because I actually flew out for the launch party and went to Disneyland and got to play this early and meet everybody. Star Wars Outlaws. Now, an open world Star Wars game should always be amazing, and on paper, Star Wars Outlaws could have been amazing. Open world game, you play as a bounty hunter in between episodes 5 and 6. It lets you jump from planet to planet, do jobs for various factions, immerse yourself in the most nostalgic era of Star Wars. Count me in. That should have been amazing. But Star Wars Outlaws had a lot of things going against it during its launch window that ended up making it one of the biggest financial flops of the 2020s in terms of games. Before you say anything in the comments, I'm fully aware of the fact that Star Wars Outlaws has received several major patches and overhauls, and it's not bad now. If this game launched the way it is today, I wouldn't be talking about it. But when Star Wars Outlaws launched in 2024, it was extremely buggy. It was shallow, repetitive, nowhere close to the open world Star Wars experience that we all hope for, and the bad word of mouth did not help sales, especially since there was already some pretty serious Star Wars fatigue and open world gaming fatigue as in general. Outlaws massively underperformed. Some reports claim that Ubisoft had to drop their sales forecast by over 2 million units. Again, the game is okay now, but there's no denying the poor state it was in on launch day. And if you want to talk about games that were hyped like crazy and immediately died, this game certainly belongs on this list, and nobody wants to pick locks in this game. I'm just telling you. If you know, you know. At number 9, Forspoken. Who remembers Forspoken? We've Forspoken about it. So Sony would probably prefer we forget about it, but we don't do that on this channel. The fantasy RPG was put together by Square Enix, and it was billed as one of the big PS5 exclusives for 2023. It promised amazing visuals, an immersive open world, breathtaking combat, a great story, incredible combat mechanics. In reality, what we got was, I'll be nice, decent traversal, mediocre combat, a stupid story, horrible dialogue, and a whole bunch of bugs and performance issues. Forsaken was supposed to be one of the big reasons to buy a PS5 in the first few years of its life cycle, but it ended up being a massive stain on both Sony and Square Enix's reputations. Despite all the commercials, all the billboards, all the marketing money that were trying to convince you and me that it was epic, it was a must-play RPG, it ended up being a massive sales disappointment. In Square Enix, they even stated during a financial report that the game contributed to a considerable downside risk to their earnings. That's business lingo for ouch. At number 8, Halo Infinite. This one is sad because on one hand, Halo Infinite is by far the best game of the 343 trilogy. On the other hand, there's so many obvious problems with it that it should have been weeded out during development. Instead, it ended up leading to the game's downfall. Halo Infinite launched as 2 separate products. You had the paid campaign and the free multiplayer. It's not a big deal, I guess, but that led to a lot of people not actually playing the campaign, which was decent, and they focused instead on the multiplayer. So the community, it was fractured right out of the gate. Who does that? But once the multiplayer started getting more traction, things got weird. Player counts for Halo Infinite's multiplayer were actually okay initially because the core gameplay was good. But then there was a major issue with the progression and a very small amount of available content, which led to a lot of people leaving for other PvP games on the market at the time, while 343 puzzlingly refused to fix the problems. By the time the team woke up from their month-long hiatus or nap and started issuing patches to fix the common criticisms, it was too late. The community was far too small to financially justify continuing support. Halo Infinite was supposed to be a 10-year game, but support ended in November of this year, less than 4 years after launch day. I loved Halo back in the day. I really hope Microsoft can get things back on track soon. I don't know if it's possible. Ever since Bungie left the franchise, it seems like nobody cares or knows what's going on with the IP. It really does. And the thing is, if you're not going to listen to the community, you're not going to make it. And if you're going to not give content on launch day or continue to give content, gamers are going to go find games that will give them content. And there are games out there and developers that get it. Look at Arc Raiders. I mean, look at Fortnite. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. At number 7, Redfall. Remember it? Microsoft would probably prefer you don't. I remember when the game was announced. I was intrigued. It was another open world co-op shooter. But this one had some interesting ideas at the conceptual level. You were fighting vampires and their minions with cool weapons. And then you had various characters who had different abilities to make the experience more varied. I'm down for that. And it was being developed by Arcane, who had previously made Dishonored and Prey 2017. Okay. I mean, it was a promising group of people to make something interesting out of the open world co-op shooter genre. So what did we get with Redfall? We ended up with a painfully standard and hilariously buggy experience with basically zero replay value. I don't have any idea what was going on during the development of this game because it was allegedly in works for 4 to 5 years. On launch day, it honestly seemed like it was barely pre-alpha. I mean, Microsoft had built this as one of their biggest exclusives of the Xbox Series era. Instead, they had to have Phil Spencer publicly apologize for the state of the game upon release and promise that they would keep a closer eye on developers during the development of their projects. What are we doing? At number 6, I'm going to take you guys all the way to the Brink. Some of you are probably too young to remember Brink. Heck, some of you probably weren't even alive yet when Brink was first released, but I was there, and I very clearly remember how much of an overhyped flop it was. This multiplayer FPS was published by Bethesda. Yep, that Bethesda, back in 2011. It was supposed to be the next big thing for FPS games. Fast-paced combat, art style, parkour, which was a brand new concept for a big-budget FPS game at that time. The gameplay of Brink, it wasn't terrible, but what killed it was a massive list of technical issues that made it borderline unplayable during the first few weeks. And Bethesda, they had put a lot of money into marketing this game. It was the new Call of Duty killer, directly going up against COD during its prime. And again, This game was released in 2011, same year as classic Modern Warfare 3 came out, and just 1 year after the original Black Ops. Come on. A game with a bunch of technical problems. It wasn't going to be able to compete with the king of arcade FPS shooters, no matter how good the core gameplay loop was. And that is what is tragic about it. The gameplay was decent. If the technical issues hadn't been there, maybe Brink could have been somewhat of a competitor to Call of Duty and could have even turned into a major franchise. But due to the horrible launch and the sheer dominance of other multiplayer shooters at the time, it wasn't just COD. It was Halo. It was Gears of War. Brink was literally left in the bargain bin, the dustbin of gaming history. There were a few attempts to save it, including a shift to free-to-play in 2017, but it was too late. Now we arrive at the top 5 today. Payday 3. Can we all agree Payday 2 is one of the most influential co-op shooters of all time? Still a huge community to this day. When the third game was announced, the community went nuts. The devs were basically promising that Payday 3 would be everything that made Payday 2 good, plus a bunch of new content, abilities, weapons, progression adjustments. Sounded like the perfect game. Well, the issue started on launch day when Payday 3 barely functioned, and then when it did function, when you could play the game, it seemed like half the game was missing or locked behind additional paywalls, slapping you in the face over and over. Payday 3 had a laundry list of problems, and to this day, instead of fixing them, it seemed like the developers were more interested in just milking Payday 2 because that's where all the players went back to. It was just a few months ago, they decided to add a DLC subscription to Payday 2, not Payday 3. Let that sink in. You released Payday 3 a few years ago, and Payday 2 is a decade old, but instead of making the latest game more appealing, you're just going to add new monetization schemes to a decade-old game. If that doesn't scream Payday 3 flopped, I don't know what does. At number 4, Splitgate 2. Now, Splitgate 1 was a niche game, had a passionate following, some really high player peaks in Steam during the 2020-2021 COVID era. The developers, they decided after a few years it was time to crank it into overdrive, apply everything they had learned to the new experience, which would be Splitgate 2. Fortunately, it also came with a lot of changes that seemingly were made in order to make the game more appealing to casual gamers. Make it more simple to other FPS games on the market, which obviously didn't make people happy. Splitgate 2 launched in June of this year, and it got crappy reception from gamers and extremely low player counts. Things got so bad that in late July, just a month after launch, the developers announced they were going back to beta and reworking the game from the ground up. Then it was rebranded to Splitgate Arena Reloaded in December. And it actually... it's pretty decent now, but Splitgate 2 was one of the biggest flops I've seen in a while. Now, there was a lot of marketing behind this sequel, and then the launch was so bad that they literally had to go back to the drawing board and essentially relaunch the game 5 months later. Even today, following the relaunch, the player counts aren't great. It's actually a shame because the original Splitgate was awesome. I don't think the sequel was necessary at all. They could have just kept updating the original game and put more marketing into that and have a grassroots community similar to games like Warfare and Fortnite. But they didn't. And here we have it. At number 3, this pains me, Black Ops 7. Activision was really hoping this game would catch on, hit the same heights as Black Ops 2. The nostalgia bait was real. Black Ops 7, jam-packed with Black Ops 2 nostalgia bait. There's an absurd amount of marketing juice here. After several years of falling sales and player counts for Call of Duty, Black Ops 7 was basically a Hail Mary attempt at getting things back on track. They pulled out all the stops to try and give the players what they wanted. Unfortunately, they also put in a bunch of crap that nobody wanted. They also pulled the rug out from under the community on several promised features, and they also were going up against Battlefield, Ark, Raiders, Marvel Rivals, all of which were very community-driven shooters that were giving their communities exactly what they wanted. Black Ops 7 was the lowest-selling Call of Duty game in over a decade, and it led to Activision having to make a long public apology for letting the franchise get so far off track and promise a change in strategy going forward. We'll wait and see what that actually means and how much of that promise comes to fruition. But the fact that the apology happened at all is unprecedented for a franchise this big like Activision. It also doesn't help when you go Black Ops 6, Black Ops 7 back to back, or you have these sub-franchises that you literally have 7 and 8 titles, rebooted titles in. At number 2, you probably thought it was going to be number 1. Concord, the poster child for failed multiplayer games. Sony reportedly put hundreds of millions of dollars into development of the new hero shooter with the intention of it becoming their new big-name franchise. I think they were trying to replicate the success of games like Overwatch. They wanted to create this massive roster of fan-favorite characters that they could use as the basis for spin-offs in other games, movies, TV shows. The money was everywhere. That doesn't work when the game that is supposed to kick off your universe is a massive piece of crap that nobody wants. Concord launched in August of 2024 with a 9-figure budget for development and advertising, and the result, nobody played it. In fact, sales were so low that after 2 weeks on the market, Sony announced they were shutting down the servers and issuing refunds to everyone who bought it. The sales were so low They couldn't justify paying to keep the servers online or pay the salaries of anyone working on updates. In a blink of an eye, Sony, poof, blew hundreds of millions of dollars. If that doesn't deserve the #1 spot today, I don't know what does, but there's actually one game that I think is more deserving of it, and it's kind of a precursor. But I also want to touch on Concord. When you decide to be driven by other things that you're putting in your game and other agendas instead of just making a good game for gamers, and you have other motivations, this is what happens. And at #1 today, this is going to be a hot take probably. To be fair, the game isn't even out yet, but I can see the writing on the wall. Marathon, an upcoming extraction shooter from Bungie. Usually people would be pretty excited for anything new from Bungie, but this game, it's already baked in controversy from the start. First of all, another extraction shooter coming out at a time when people just want something new. Second of all, it's going to have a $40 price tag when other multiplayer shooters are either free to play or cost way less. Third of all, the gameplay during the first few playtests wasn't really all that good. It was missing a ton of core features that people expect from extraction shooters. Fourth of all, Bungie has been getting hit with controversy after controversy over the last few years, including several controversies around Marathon itself, like the time they were caught stealing assets from Twitter artists and had to issue a public apology and perform an investigation into their own development team to make sure nobody was plagiarizing. I'm not kidding, that happened. Following the embarrassingly low player counts from the playtest, Marathon was delayed by almost a year for additional polish and gameplay overhauls. The game was re-revealed a few weeks ago and now has a 2026 release date, but the new playtest player counts, they aren't much better. Frankly, I think the damage has already been done. There's probably no saving it. And that may sound really negative, but we've seen it. With how much money has been sunk into development, it has to come out the door eventually. But a lot of people have been branding it as Concord 2.0. I don't blame them. Sony dropped several $1 billion on the acquisition of Bungie, and then they sunk several hundreds of $1 million in development of this game. At this point, there's a 0% chance that it even comes close to being a financial success. I'm going to call it right now for you guys. Prediction, 2026. Marathon is going to be the biggest flop in gaming history. Might actually result in the end of Bungie. And with all the money that has already been put into the game and its marketing, I think it deserves the top spot today. I know it's not even out yet, but come on. The writing is on the wall. And there you have it, my friends. Those are some of the most overhyped games that just completely failed on launch that we've ever seen. If you guys want to check out the playlist below for just as much binge watching top 10s, top 20s video games, COD history, ranking videos as you can get, definitely go check it out. I'll see you soon.